Hello everyone, my name is Josh and welcome to WHIMS, and today I'm going to give you my review for both Beetlejuice 1988 and Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. And Beetlejuice came out in 1988 and it stars Michael Keaton, Alec Baldwin, Winona Ryder, Gina Davis, Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones. And this film came out at a time where a film like this, as Beetlejuice actually is, would have been a massive, huge risk for the studio. In fact, Larry Wilson and Michael McDowell, who'd actually, co-wrote the screenplay together, they were originally going to make the film a lot more darker and a lot more gorier. But thanks to the help of Warren Selznick, I think his name is, or Scarsborough, he effectively came on board after he basically had worked with Tim Burton in the past on rewrites for Batman, or he'd actually been doing a lot of rewriting for various different famous screenplays throughout Hollywood. So he came on board to rewrite the script and make it more of the fun, off-the-wall, very kind of, family-friendly film that we all kind of all know and love to this day, with his involvement, with his input. And the film stars Alec Baldwin and Gina Davis, and they play a couple known as Adam and Barbara Maitland. They're a happy, fun-loving couple until they decide to take a trip down to their local hardware store. On their way home, they end up getting involved in a car accident after narrowly avoiding running over a puppy. And this actually turns into a much more sinister story because it turns out that they end up, falling off the bridge into the moat and they end up drowning. But they don't know that they're dead yet. It very slowly dawns on them that they are actually ghosts. And through a series of very funny gags, including Gina Davis noticing that the mirror doesn't cast any of their reflections, and that they have a book called The Handbook for the Recently Deceased, which sounds like really bad stereo instructions, and the fact that whenever they leave the house, they end up on one of Saturn's moons occupied by sandworms. They are very unsurprisingly very kind of, worried and very concerned and confused about where they're going to go. But things go from bad to worse when it actually turns out that a new family has decided to move into their home, and they're now planning on renovating the house to look more like what Catherine O'Hara's character, Delia Deetz, feels her sensibilities should be. And she plays a struggling artist who has more of an eccentric, very off-the-wall, very kind of gothic sensibility to her art. She has these very weird sculptures, like one that looks like a brain that's sort of being held together by like a little plant stem, and then there's one that looks like a Christmas tree if it was alive and walking. It's very bizarre, like these very bizarre designs. And her and her husband Charles, played by Jeffrey Jones, and her stepdaughter Lydia move into this house, and they immediately turn everything upside down. But the only one who actually seems to notice the Maitlands in their full form is Lydia, whereas all the other attempts that the Maitlands have of actually trying to scare the new homeowners have often resulted in them just acting very nonchalant because they can't actually physically see them. So when Lydia finds out that they actually exist and they're upstairs in the attic, she becomes quite intrigued and quite curious, to the point where she actually breaks into their upstairs attic room and finds the handbook for the recently deceased on one of the tables in that room. But in the meantime, the Maitlands actually are trying to figure out what to do. They're trying to figure out where to go and who to summon. But then they find an advertisement for a bio-exorcist by the name of Beetlejuice, who claims to be able to get rid of the living. He actually comes to life in various different scenes throughout the film, one of which is from behind, where he's looking over the obituaries, which is, of course, what he calls the business section of the Afterlife newspaper. And there's also a very funny commercial that he does where he's in the cemetery, sort of imitating a cowboy sort of accent, and he's sort of, telling them all these different things, like, oh, I've got demons running all through me, and hey, if you have a free demon possession with every exorcism. You can't beat that, can you? Now say it once, say it twice, third time's the charm, and things like that. Like, he's very much trying to act like that very swanky, advertising executive. But what's really interesting about Beetlejuice and how he is introduced in this film is he is a guy who is 100% a con artist. He is a compulsive liar, and he is basically someone who is quite simply a pervert. Every single time he encounters a woman like Gina Davis's Barbara Maitland or Lydia, he wants to try to do things to them, whether it's actually assaulting them or whether it's him wanting to marry them. He constantly wants to get with someone, if that makes sense. And that's kind of one of the things that would put a lot of people off. But I think because Michael Keaton adds such charm and such personality and such a cartoonish, off the wall vibe to him, it does make him it does make him a character that you almost love to hate, almost, where it's like he is very obnoxious, he is very absurd, he is kind of a bit creepy in a lot of respects, but he's just so damn funny. I mean, a lot of the scenes in the cemetery where they first go into the model, Barbara and Adam, are absolutely wonderful. They really are very funny, and a lot of the jokes are really hilarious and they're very off the wall. But I also really just like the fact that Michael Keaton just completely and utterly commits to it. And let me make this very clear that he basically was the guy who was originally hired a year later to play Batman. So it really is one of those things where you kind of think to yourself, how could Tim Burton have looked at this performance and said, that's the guy I want to play Batman? It's very bizarre and very off the wall. But it is very funny to see that he goes from this very quirky kind of off the wall cartoon character to being kind of like Batman, Bruce Wayne, this very tortured billionaire who has a very tortured past but also wants to fight crime and things like that. It's very interesting. So, excuse me, a lot of the stuff in this film is iconic, from the Daewoo Banana Boat song, the Michael Belafonte song, the Banana Boat song in the dining room where the Deetz get possessed. That scene's iconic. There's also the scene in the model where they're first introduced to Beetlejuice. There's the sandworm sequence where Barbara and Adam are fighting off the sandworm and trying to get back into the house, back into their reality. There's so many great set pieces and iconic moments in this film, and a lot of them do earn a lot of big laughs. But what's very interesting about this film is back when it first came out, it was a huge risk for the studio of Warner Brothers. It was one of those films where they wanted to change the title originally, that they said to themselves, we don't know if people are going to understand what Beetlejuice is or what it's supposed to be about. Why can't we just call it a different title, like, Ghost House or House Ghosts or something like that? And Tim Burton literally said at one point when they were going over alternative titles, he goes, why don't you just call it Scared Sheetless? And the studio actually was very happy to sort of have that title, and it was actually to his horror that he said, no, we've got to keep it as Beetlejuice, we've got to keep it as it is. And thank goodness Tim Burton put his foot down, because can you imagine a film called Scared Sheetless that's supposed to be kind of like the supernatural comedy horror thing? It would go down terribly. A lot of people would say Beetlejuice or Scared Sheetless, good film, terrible title. And it's really one of those things where you just kind of think, thank God he put his foot down. And this film's a masterpiece. I first learnt about it when I was about 10 or 11. I was a huge fan of the cartoon series of Beetlejuice, the Canadian-produced cartoon series. And when I first heard about this film, I thought it was an adaptation of the cartoon series. So when I actually wanted to watch it, I actually couldn't watch it because I don't think my parents thought I was old enough to watch it. But then I ended up, my dad ended up recording it one Christmas off the telly. And I remember it quite well because during the ad breaks, they had an advertisement for Rennie's digestive tablets, effectively for indigestion, and I remember that jingle, and I remember that little gag that they had in those adverts, if you remember them, like ITV Christmas movies sponsored by Rennie's, wah wah, that ad. But yeah, it's a really fun time. I do have a lot of fond memories with this film, but I just think it's a really good film on the whole, because it is basically a twist on the haunted house setup, whereas usually we would follow the story like from the Deetz's perspective. We'd follow it from the point of view of the humans moving into the house, and then they discover gradually that it's haunted. But this film does something different. It actually tells it from the point of view of the ghosts who are being who are doing the hauntings, and they actually just find it very annoying that these new people have come into their house and effectively, started to rearrange their lives, rearrange their entire home, and make it look into this very kind of weird Art Nouveau kind of looking place. It looks really hideous, but then at the same time it has a certain degree of style, and it just really feels like a lot of it is mostly to do with the fact that the Maitlands just want to have their house back, and they even say at one point to Juno, their caseworker in the afterlife, that they wouldn't mind sharing the house with people who are more like, and then she goes, more like you used to be, like meaning that they were a couple. So it's like they really wouldn't mind sharing the house with other people, which just that the sort of people that they aren't the sort of people that they gel with, and it's really kind of interesting. But I just love the fact that this film just has a ton of great gags. I like the scary face gag that Beetlejuice has when he's showing people, like, can you be scary? And he literally just does this thing with his down below, and it's like those moments are just really funny. Like those little gags where he just does those little things just really make me laugh all the more than the big things that he does, like kicking the tree and saying nice fucking model. That's hilarious because that's again an F-bomb in a mostly family friendly film, so it is really funny. But then also, it's just really funny just seeing Michael Keaton's reactions, like when he's doing something very inappropriate with Barbara in one scene, and everyone's like going, "Hey, hey, hey," and then Adam goes, excuse me, and he's like going, what? And he gives this reaction as if he's outraged, but it's almost like a comical, confused degree. And then Adam just goes, "We are leaving now," and it's like. That, to me, is the perfect example of why Michael Keaton works as his character. Like, he can really create... Like, he's basically this horrible, dirty old man, but he really plays it to a degree where it is actually really charming and really kind of almost kind of strangely likeable in a way where it is sort of like... You totally get why he is the way he is, or why he's this really just awful, horrendous, horrific person. You wouldn't want to meet him in real life, but at the same time, you kind of do find him hilarious, and he is very quirky and just so off the wall that you just can't help but love him. And it's one of those things that I really just like about the character so much. And there's this really great gag where he puts his arm around both Barbara and Adam in that same cemetery scene, where he goes, "I understand, but in order for me to do that, I need to get to know you guys. We've got to get closer, get to be real pals." And he like spits something up, like like a bit of snot or something, and he sort of like spits it out on his coat, and he says, "Save that guy for later." And if you look very closely, you can actually see Alec Baldwin's face. And you can tell that he really just doesn't want to crack up. He really wants to break, and he really wants to burst out laughing, but he can't because, of course, he's got to do the scene. He's got to be repulsed by Beetlejuice, but at the same time, he has to be quite businesslike. It's so wonderful, and there's a lot of great moments like that. But I just really love this film. It's hilarious. It's a great starting point, and I really like the fact that at the very beginning of the film, when Barbara is talking to Jane, their realtor or their estate agent. When she goes, "This house too big for you, honey. Like, it ought to be for a couple more with a family." And there's this moment where Gina Davis has this look on her face where she feels genuinely sad and very upset. And she clearly wants to tell Jane to F off, but she also wants to just, she wants to be polite as well. So she just says, thank you, Jane. I'll see you in a few weeks." And you can almost tell that she almost wants to shut the door in her face, like really slam the door and say, "Yeah, bugger off you," or something like that. But it really is quite sad, and it really kind of ties into what happens later on with them forming a relationship with Lydia, and she almost feels like a surrogate daughter or a surrogate child. The child that they never got to have is sort of coming into their lives because Lydia doesn't gel with her family. She doesn't gel with her father. She doesn't gel with her stepmother. She feels very much out of touch, hence why she has this very goth-style persona. So when she meets the Maitlands, she feels like she's more attuned to them than she is with her actual family. And I like the idea that, they always end up becoming her surrogate parents by the end. So when they're singing, songs like Shake, Shake, Shake Sonora by Michael Belafonte, you really do get this impression that she really is finally fitting in. And the fact that her, her more goth-style persona has been drawn back a little bit, and she is, looking more, bright and colourful and, happy in herself, emotionally as well as, appearance-wise. That to me really goes to show that there is a certain degree of thought that's put into this script, even though a good majority of its best lines, like the tree model sequence, nice fucking model, that entire sequence was entirely improvised by Michael Keaton. So a lot of the best gags were often improvised by Michael Keaton. There does feel like there is a sense of structure, and there is a sense of something, coming together. It's almost like the idea of the found family, that if you can't gel with your actual family that you're born into, you'll find someone who's more within your wheelhouse. This does feel more modern than a lot of films that did come out in the 80s. Excuse me, so it does have that flavour of being kind of like a very modern and a very relatable film. And it also manages to just be a really good family film with a lot of fun gags and a lot of very outlandishly quirky special effects that were very practical as well. So there's all these great things, and of course the cast as well. The cast really is the magic formula of this entire thing, where if it wasn't for the cast, and the cast really being dedicated to the material that they were given and working with Tim, I don't think this would have worked nearly as well. And I feel like them casting Michael Keaton in this role really did feel like a blessing, because honestly it was amazing. And I literally think it's one of his best performances. And let me just say, the sequel, to really kind of keep it short and simple, is really, really different. I like the fact that they're not going the same route as the original, where it is basically another haunting where someone dies and someone's haunting another location. Although you could have very easily just done a sequel without any of the recurring characters coming back. But what I really like about this film, hence why sort of Lydia became the secret weapon in that first film, where she sort of was the character who was sort of secretly... The film is secretly about her fitting in and her coming to terms with who she is and trying to fit in the world that she finds herself in, even though she feels like she can't relate to any of the people in her family. She can't relate to her stepmother or her father. She herself goes on the biggest journey in this film, and so does the Maitlands in turn. They feel like the mirror image of what she's going through. They have to learn to deal with their situation and try to find the best in it, whereas she has to do the same. But then she ends up finding that purpose and that drive to, be the person who she wants to be, whilst also, indulging in her more darker aspects, that she is involved in this very goth, very dead world. That is kind of like her arc, and in many ways, when she finds a harmony in that, she can be fully happy and fully herself. And in a way, it's sort of Winona Ryder, Lydia's story in this one as well, except this time she now has to be a mother to a child who is played by Jenna Ortega. Her name's Astrid, and she effectively is she couldn't be any more different than Lydia, whereas she's into the dark, the macabre and the supernatural. Astrid is more interested in physics, in, science and all these other things. When she goes to dress up as someone for Halloween, she dresses up as Marie Curie, a famous, feminist scientist. And she is quite frustrated with her mother, Lydia, because she claims to have this gift where she can talk to the dead. She even has her own psychic TV show called Ghost House, which is kind of a play on the original title of the original Beetlejuice. And she claims to see ghosts, but she can't see Jenna Ortega, Astrid's father. And that's because she just can't see him. But she doesn't believe her. She thinks that she's a fraud. So she runs away after the funeral of Charles, who has a very hilarious stop-motion animated sequence death. And Catherine O'Hara's character, Delia Deetz, is sort of refinding herself, rediscovering herself through her modern art in a gallery in London. And Lydia is being married to her producer, played by Justin Theroux, who's a total scumbag named Rory. And just after the funeral, Rory proposes to Lydia, and this causes Astrid to immediately just shoot off in the other direction and go find somewhere else to be in Winter River. So she ends up stumbling across a boy by the name of Jeremy, who she immediately hits it off with. He lives in a tree house, and she immediately strikes up a bond with him. And during Halloween, they both meet up at his house, and she gives a comment about, he has a lot of 90s records in his room, and he has a lot of 90s paraphernalia. And on Halloween, he says, Astrid says, "You look a little bit like James Dean there." And he goes, "Funny, I thought my mum and dad said I looked more like Richie from Happy Days." But what's very interesting is he looks like Artie Cunningham from Christine, John Carpenter's Christine. And I thought, I can't believe no one made a John Carpenter's Christine joke. And that's actually kind of very interesting, because this feels more like a Stephen King, more like Tim Burton doing Stephen King, than if Tim Burton actually did Stephen King, if that makes sense. Because there's not only just that one reference, where they actually have a character dress up like Artie Abrams or Artie Cunningham, from John Carpenter's Christine, but they also have a scene that is very reminiscent of the ending of Carrie. And if you've seen the ending of the original, the Carrie, like the music and everything like that, the very kind of dreamy and very whimsical aspect with the bright colours and the very wonderful flute music, like the wonderful flute music in Carrie, you know what scene I'm talking about, where it turns out that, it's a happy dream, but then it turns into a nightmare, but then it turns out that it's a dream kind of thing. It does play on that a little bit, and I thought that was hilarious. As soon as I heard the flute, I thought, I know what you're doing, Tim Burton. I know what you're doing here. You're making a parody of Christine. And it's actually really funny when you make that connection, but it is really wonderful. But not only is that happening, what we find out later on is that Beetlejuice is back, and this time he wants to return to the world of the living, and he needs Lydia's help to get away from his ex-wife, called Dolores, played by Monica Bellucci, who used to be a priestess of a death cult who she tries to poison. But she comes back to life after he essentially, cuts her into little bits and puts her in boxes. And Monica Bellucci's sequence as Dolores in this film really does feel like this is the part where I feel like this character has such a good introduction that I was actually kind of disappointed that she wasn't in more of the film, because I feel like a lot of her scenes were very well done, especially that introduction where she's sort of like stapling herself back together as the song Tragedy is playing in the background. I thought that was very funny and very clever. I also liked the church sequence at the very end of the film. I thought it was very funny, very hilarious. There was great callbacks to the original, but it didn't feel like it was trying too hard to be the original film. And a lot of people have said, a lot of the critical reviews for this film have said, it's basically got a lot going on and it feels like a bit cluttered and a bit of a mess. But I think, to me personally, it still works. It still manages to get the ball rolling into motion. The death of the dad, Charles Deetz, kind of starts off as a very good inciting incident for all the drama to happen. I like the fact that they keep the focus on Lydia and Astrid's characters and about, these two generations of Deetz women kind of trying to find each other again after all this separation and all this strife. I like the fact that Catherine O'Hara has a much more bigger role in this and she feels like she's having a really good time. And I like the fact that Beetlejuice is a little bit more three-dimensional this time round. He isn't just simply a crook and a scumbag. He is still a crook and a scumbag, but he's not just a crook and a scumbag, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. But I really just loved this. I really did feel like it felt like a very timeless film. There are a couple of instances where they do reference the modern world, like they reference influencers and things like that. But on the whole, I felt like this was a very timeless story, and I feel like that's what made Tim Burton want to make this film, want to come back and make it, because I feel like this film still is a really, really good sequel. And I feel like Twin Peaks The Return, this feels like a really good example of how to do a legacy sequel well, where it manages to give a little bit of a hand wave to all these very wonderful characters that we all know from the original, whilst also including elements about what it means to grow older, what it means to have a legacy and all these other things. And it manages to bring these two things together brilliantly and beautifully. And I think it's a really good film. Yes, it's got a lot going on, but so did Avengers Infinity War, and everyone loves that film. A lot of people can make the same complaints about that feels cluttered, or that feels like there's so much going on. But to me, that still works, and a lot of people loved it. So what do people know when they say, oh, it's a bit too cluttered? I still think it works in the case of Beetlejuice and Infinity War. Sometimes having a lot of stuff going on doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, as long as you have a great way of bringing it all together. And I think having Lydia and having Astrid be those constants in all these different storylines really does a good job of bringing these stories together when we get to that final act. So, yeah, this film was really good. Both films are wonderful. The original was a masterpiece with a lot of great gags and a lot of really wonderful cast members playing their roles beautifully, including, the likes of Catherine O'Hara and, Winona Ryder in the original, and, of course, the Maitlands. But I will say, before I sign off with this film, I am actually quite sad that the Maitlands weren't in this one. And I get why they weren't in it, because in the first one, their story was over and it would just seem very pointless to have them be brought back. But I just feel like they could have given a little bit more of an explanation as to why they just sort of left. Like, oh, they found a loophole. That's the only thing they say. And I thought it was really wonderful. And I really do have to give a special mention to the likes of Willem Dafoe in this. He plays a really good character who's a lot of fun, and I just really thought his character was a real breakaway from, the sort of roles that he's used to playing, where he does almost feed into the over-the-topness of some of his personas, and he does it very well here. And I feel like there's a lot of good stuff in this, and I feel like Alfred Goth and Michael Miller did a really wonderful job with this screenplay, and they did a really good job of bringing stuff back together and really kind of just making Delia and Astrid sort of like the focus of these stories, bringing these characters, having these two characters, these two generations of Deetz women was the constant in this particular screenplay, and it really works. It really does work, and it's just a lot of fun. Even if you don't think the film is as cohesive as it should be, you will have a good time just seeing all these characters again. But I personally really enjoyed it. It was a really solid film. It had a great cast. All these cast members did a really good job, and Tim Burton's back to full force. So I really do think he's going to have a really great, resurgence now. And I'm just so happy to see Michael Keaton back as Beetlejuice, because for the longest time I was really worried when I saw promotional material that they were going to cast Johnny Depp as Beetlejuice, and I thought, no, if you're going to do a sequel to Beetlejuice, you better get Michael Keaton back, because he is Beetlejuice. You can't replace him. You can't have any other actor play that role. You can't have someone like, Johnny Depp play that role or anybody else. You have to have Michael Keaton. He just is Beetlejuice. So the fact that they got him at 70 years old to come back and play this character is an absolute, stroke of genius. And he's worth the price of admission alone. But I feel like what they did with this was really well done. And I really do hope Tim Burton has a really good career after this, because he is apparently directing 4 episodes of the new Wednesday series, which I can't wait for. I'm really excited. And I'm really excited to see where he goes from here. But yeah, I really enjoyed this film. So if you like this film, let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you like this video and you want to see more, please leave a thumbs up if you like this video. And please subscribe for more if you do. I will be coming back later to give you my video for my stand-up routine, so look forward to that very soon. I hope you're all having a very good day. Take care, bye for now.